Saturday. This is, I guess, our Wednesday show, but we are live. Hoping it's always fun interact with you guys in the chat. I am your host, David Ubben, here with my co-hosts, Damien Harris, two-time defending national champion. Well, not defending, but two-time national champion at Alabama. And Chris Vannini. You didn't win any national championships, Chris, but you are a senior writer at The Athletic. Guys, we have a ranking. We have a real bracket from the real people whose real opinions actually decide how this is going to go down. Fresh off of stiff-arming Florida State. This is the first time we've seen their rankings since then. Chris, I guess, well, let's do some business before we get into it. For those of you guys watching on YouTube, again, thank you for being here. Be sure to hit the like button, the subscribe button. Make sure to check us out. Let's start with the field, Chris. Let's start with the field. Our number 1 seed is Oregon, as expected. Number 2 is Georgia. Number 3, Miami. Number 4, BYU. That gets into the quarterfinals. I'm trying to do this in the least confusing way possible. It's going to be weird, guys. We're going to get used to it. The 8-9 game is Tennessee and Indiana. That'd be in Neyland Stadium. The 5-12 game would be Ohio State and Boise State. Ohio State grabbing that 5 seed. Despite being number 2 in the rankings, Penn State would be the 7-10 game against Notre Dame, and Texas, Alabama. Alabama going to DKR in December in the 6-11 game. All right, remember with the bracket, it gets a little weird with the seeding. Boise State is actually ranked number 12. That's one of the more surprising things. Chris, what was your biggest takeaway to start, I guess?
My biggest takeaway is that the real drama of this rankings actually comes at the bottom, not the top anymore.
I agree.
Oregon, Ohio State, Georgia. There's nothing to say about them, really. Like, they make sense. They're where we expected. Ohio State being the number 2 seed and the number 5, the number 2 in the rankings, number 5 seed.
It's going to be confusing.
It's going to be an adjustment. But when we get conference championship games and some things knock each other down more, it may work out a little bit easier. Yeah. But I think you start really kind of 6-12 from Penn State down to Boise State and who got left out. That's where the real drama is. And more than anything else, the number 1 thing in these rankings that I was most surprised about is BYU being down at number 9. Yes, they're the number 4 seed, so it may not seem like it matters. But because they're the number 9 seed, if they drop a game, suddenly they could get leapt by a Boise State who's not far behind at number 12.
Because I don't think there's a could about it. I think it's a will.
Absolutely.
Well, we'll see, because it could be a one-loss Iowa State, and who knows. But that BYU team is undefeated. It has 2 top 20 wins. It won at SMU, and they blew out Kansas State at home. The 4 teams ahead of them, Indiana, Tennessee, Penn State, and Texas, have 1 top 25 win combined between them.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I'm very surprised how low BYU is, and the Big 12, I imagine, is not happy about that.
Yeah, I mean, we kind of thought this might be what happened. We'll get into BYU more in a little bit. Damien, this is the first time we've done this, the 12-team playoff, looking at the bracket, the first rankings. What was your biggest takeaway from the first time kind of seeing this thing get real?
Yeah, well, I'm wondering how many Alabama fans are going to be upset with me because they actually got into the bracket. And listen, I said from the jump that there's definitely the opportunity for them to get in. So I'm not shocked to see their names in the list. I mean, I think when you really dive deep and you think about, well, what is this about? It's about entertainment. Like, there's ratings involved. There are a lot of things that go and play factors in this. And Alabama is one of the marquee programs in college football. So I think they're going to try to make a way for them to get in. And the path is clear now. They already have them predicted to be in. But I think this road game in LSU, I think that's going to change a lot of things for a lot of teams. Georgia also has a big matchup against Ole Miss this weekend. I think the SEC, I mean, obviously, in my opinion, it's the best conference in all of college football. But right now with the playoff system, the brackets being released, like, the SEC is going to be the conference that has the most drama, the most mix and matches, potentials for ties, and just the craziest route to how many teams are going to get in the playoffs. So I'm just really looking to see how the SEC plays out for the rest of the year.
Yeah, 2 things with that. One, we saw on that graphic, Austin Mock's model has Alabama with a 53% chance to make the playoff. If they beat LSU, it might be like 80% because the rest of that schedule is so soft. It seems unlikely that they will get into the college football. I mean, the SEC championship. We'll see. And 2, I do think Alabama has to be a little bit careful and has to, the playoff always makes for strange bedfellows. You remember in 2014, TCU plays Minnesota early in the season, and Minnesota keeps going in and out of the top 25. They keep getting TCU had a top 25 win one week, and then they have another. And TCU fans are like rooting for Minnesota every single week. And it might be a similar thing with Alabama and Mizzou, because they have that win, they need that win, and that's a second top 25 win from them. As soon as I saw Mizzou in that bottom part, I was like, Bama's good, Bama's golden.
Yep.
And those top 25 wins mean a lot to the committee.
Yeah, well, I want to ask just because
depends.
We've talked a lot about how we anticipate this LSU Alabama game to be an elimination game for one of these two teams. But I've got my eye on this Georgia Ole Miss matchup, and I'm gonna go ahead and give y'all a little insight before y'all listen to our prediction pod. I like Ole Miss in that game. So if Ole Miss dethrones Georgia, what does that do? Does that still make this LSU Alabama game an elimination game, or like is there?
I think it does. I think it just pushes another SEC team right in the middle of the playoff pot. I mean, I can't remember. I think Ralph was talking about needing, if you're the Big 12 or the ACC, and you're SMU, and you're sitting there with SMU and Miami and BYU and Iowa State. That whoever loses the ACC and the Big 12 championship, you are not in a great spot. And if Georgia can beat Ole Miss, and if the winner of Alabama LSU loses a game at some point later in the season, that's probably clears out a spot for the SEC. But if Georgia wins out, but they lose to Ole Miss, and Ole Miss keeps winning and takes care of business in the Egg Bowl, I mean, Ole Miss is getting in. So it's a matter of that jumble of SEC teams, those 5 teams with one loss. If they don't lose any dumb games, or if you see some upsets, I mean, Georgia's not getting left out unless they totally fall off the map. So I think more than anything, it keeps that. I don't think it affects that Alabama LSU game that much, but it definitely puts Ole Miss in a great position to make the field.
Yeah, understood.
Yeah, it is a weird spot where like BYU's lower. I think the ACC's not in a great spot for SMU being left out, and so we don't know what's going to happen. This is a spot where not only if you're the Big 12, you have an undefeated team, but they could get left by the Group of 5 team. Like the ACC and Big 12 are not in a great spot here. I think I counted 1, 2, because Notre Dame's in there as well, and Boise State. It's very heavy SEC Big 10 what we expected. And the Big 12 and the ACC are getting pushed down quite a bit.
By the way, if you guys have not already tried to or have already entered our CFP bracket challenge, you should do that. Myself, Ralph Russo, and Damien, we had a broadcast last night, and we picked how we think this bracket's going to look at the end of this, that Selection Sunday in December. And you can do the same thing, too. We've got a whole scoring system. You can watch that and learn more about that, but enter in your bracket. It's going to be fun. The best 3 entries will win a full year subscription or extension to The Athletic. So that's going to be a lot of fun. We're going to do check-ins on that on the pod. Guys, let's talk about Indiana, because I thought Indiana would get a little bit more respect from the committee. They are sitting there at number 8, the same place that they are in the media poll. The coaches poll have them at 10. I've been saying this all season, well, since about week 7, week 8, and I am more sure of it now than I have been at any other point. I get the schedule is not that strong. I get that. But if Indiana was wearing Ohio State on their chest, and they had been doing to teams what Indiana is doing, they would not be ranked 8th. It's a little ridiculous to me. I get the schedule complaints, but you look at Georgia struggling with Kentucky, and you look at all these teams. Ohio State struggles with a not very good Nebraska team. Like these things, you got at some point you got to respect dominance and being able to just beat the crap out of teams. It's not Indiana's fault that Michigan's not that great, that Washington's not that great. What did they do? They're beating the heck out of teams at this point. And to me, if you look at what Indiana has actually done, schedule aside, if you think that Ohio State or Alabama or any of the other teams that had the exact same schedule and had won by the exact same scores would be sitting there at number 8, you're kidding yourselves. It's frustrating to me. If I was an Indiana fan, I'd be furious.
I think Indiana's fine. Like
they're fine, but
you can't say.
Fine, but of all, at the same time, they should still be higher. And I will say, you say they're fine, but if you're sitting there at number 4 or you're in Georgia's spot, Georgia can still lose a dumb game and make the field. Indiana cannot. Indiana can lose to Ohio State and still make the field. Indiana can't drop, whoever they've got. I don't know who they've got left.
Yeah, because Georgia went.
Yeah.
I know. Chris
You
got
muted.
so wound
Chris
up.
is going
Chris got
on.
so
He's
wound
going
up. He
on.
muted
He's
himself.
going
you can't say schedule aside because Georgia went and won at Texas. Like Indiana,
Yeah.
they're fine because they still have to play Ohio State. Like you can't say schedule aside because schedule strength is clearly very important here for what the committee is doing. It always is. I was in the mock committee this year. I went through it. I wrote about it today on The Athletic. And the way they organize the schedules, there's a lot of green if you play good teams and red for bad teams. And it really just kind of visually hits you where strength of schedule has a really big impact. And Indiana doesn't have a win over a team in the top 25. Like, that's it. It's pretty simple. You go to Ohio State and you play a close game, you're good. That's the Penn State situation. Like, Penn State beat Illinois. They've got a couple of like decent wins, Illinois 6-3 and that kind of stuff. Indiana just needs to take care of business, not get destroyed at Ohio State, and you're probably fine.
They should just win.
They should be honestly, Ubben, I'm on the opposite of you. I feel like Indiana fans should be happy with where they are, and everything that Chris just said plays a factor. But also, they haven't been there before. Like, we don't know how this team is going to respond. And whenever it was, who was it? It was Oregon, Illinois, and Illinois just looked like they shouldn't have been in that game at all. Like, they weren't ready for the big moment. Well, although Indiana is being dominant in their wins, like, they haven't proved that they're ready for the moment yet. And I think that that's going to come against Michigan, Ohio State potentially. And then if you put the pause on Purdue, then yeah, we can sit there and look at you and be like, okay, yeah, you're ready for the moment. But when you combine their record, yes, they're 9-0. They look really good. They have been dominant, but it's just not in the fashion that convinces maybe the committee or people, fans, that they're ready for the big time matchup. So maybe that plays a part in it. I don't know. But if I was an Indiana fan, I would be happy because you couldn't have predicted this at the beginning of the season. You could not have predicted to be 9-0, undefeated, going into Michigan, Ohio State, Purdue at the end of the season in the play, like right in the middle of the college football playoffs. Like, they got to be happy to be where they are.
I would also say with Indiana, it's not that they're Michigan helmets or whatever. It's that they started unranked and that they started way down.
But that's the whole thing with the committee is that they shouldn't start. The committee doesn't start them anywhere. That's what
I know. But it's impossible to ignore.
If anybody looks me in the eyes and tells me if they're a big brand and they beat the heck out of everybody, Indiana is not getting the benefit of the doubt that a lot of these other big brands get. It's just the reality of the situation. There is no way you can look me in the eye and tell me that if Ohio State had done exactly what Indiana did, that they would not be higher than 8th in the poll. There's no way.
But they've been there. They've done that before, though.
But this is supposed to be just this year. It's supposed to be just what we've seen. And I think this is what I'm saying.
It's supposed to be.
I think you're right. That's my point, though, David. I think that the committee, without intending to, gives these schools, the bigger schools, a little bit of benefit. I think it's about recruiting. It's about the eye test, all these things. I get it, but I think my point is if you actually watch Indiana this year, they should be getting some of those eye test breaks that the bigger schools get because they've just been so good. You watch them, they do everything. It's crazy.
I feel like you said the same thing about Clemson quietly, and then they got routed. It kind of feels the same to me.
But Georgia game was not the preseason, unfortunately. But
to your point, though, I mean, you look at Michigan last year. Michigan didn't play anybody until those final 3 games, and I had them lower in my rankings, and Michigan fans got very upset, and I just kept saying, play somebody.
They were 3 in the first committee rankings.
Yeah, but again, they started high because they started where they were coming off of 2 straight playoff appearances. Like, it's impossible to kind of
not supposed
get rid of some
to be
of the
a factor, Chris. It's not supposed to be a factor.
As long as Indiana either beats Ohio State or doesn't lose by 40 points, they'll be fine.
Yeah, they'll be fine.
In the rest of the schedule. Yeah. And it is consistent. It is consistent in some ways because Army being at number 25, they have played nobody. And I don't have Army in my top 25 and people keep getting mad at me about it.
I couldn't believe it when I saw it.
Their schedule is literally the second worst in the country, only ahead of Liberty. So all the hate that Liberty was getting last year and this year, you kind of have to apply the same thing to Army right now. Again, they've got Notre Dame coming up. They've got a 5-3 North Texas team this weekend. The games are coming, but Army hasn't played anybody to this point, and I think that's fine. And that's where Indiana and Army were the only 2 teams who hadn't trailed all season until this week when Indiana went down to Michigan State. So I think that part is being consistent.
Chris, I think part of our job, especially this year, when so many things are changing, people have busy lives, there's other things going on, is sort of explaining how some of these things work. You did the mock selection exercise. I'm not sure when they actually do it. So when you are not hating on the troops and you are doing the mock selection exercise, can you give us a brief rundown of kind of how the process for making this ranking actually works? Because it's very, very different from the polls. It's different from the computer rankings on the BCS. What do people need to know about the process?
Yeah, so this was in September, and it's not like you put in your roll 1 through 25, it puts them all together and spits out a ranking like a poll. That's not how it works. What you do is, I'll run through this quickly. You submit your top 30 teams to the pool. It doesn't matter the order. Everybody's top 30 go in. If the team gets 3 or more votes, you're in the big pool. Usually ends up being a pool of about 35 to 40 teams. From that group, you vote your 1 through 6. Everybody does their 1 through 6, and then a consensus top 6 comes out of that. From that top 6, you debate, you vote your own 1 through 3, and that consensus becomes the top 3. Those are secret ballots. Nobody knows who you're voting for. That process repeats itself several times, because so they're placing 3, 3, 3, and then 4, 4, 4, 4 the rest of the way. So it's not like we're debating team this over here. You're doing it generally in like smaller pools of teams, and that's how it ultimately comes together. And you can go back after the fact and be like, hey, let's talk about these 2 teams again and get into it. But that's how the process works.
Yeah, that process of, do they call them checks? What do they call them, Chris? I can't remember what they call them. But basically you can say, yeah, let's look at these 2 teams head to head, like their exact resumes. And sometimes that does result in them being flipped. I think it's a process that gets it right a lot, but I don't know that the casual fan necessarily recognizes how different it is from the polling process. Before we get too far in the weeds on that, though, Chris, let's talk a little bit about Boise, because we were fully prepared. We've been talking about this for a while, that they were going to get kind of smacked. The committee has not been favorable to group of 5 teams. Here's why this Boise team, I think, is different, and this is why they are at number 12. Number 1, Ward Manuel was interesting. He made kind of a passing remark that they do. The committee hasn't really respected quality losses that much in the past, but it seems like that game against Oregon, I don't know that you'd call it a coin flip. Oregon was the better team in that game, but it was a close loss in which Boise acquitted themselves very, very well. We weren't sure.
I mean, Oregon had to come back from Oregon had to come back in the 4th quarter.
Yeah,
sure.
I don't know.
Sure.
I wasn't convinced watching that game that Oregon was the better team. Maybe now in hindsight, but
perhaps. Either way, it was a close game. Boise earned a lot of respect in that game. And then they beat Wazoo. Wazoo does not have a conference that the committee recognizes. The Pac-12 champion is irrelevant in all of this. They showed up at number 21. They are 8-1, 7-1, I believe.
7-1.
They show up at number 21. I was surprised to see them because their schedule is not very good. But it's just that simple. The for a lot of the G5 programs we've seen over and over again, they're way, way lower in the polls. But Boise, the committee clearly respected what they saw in that Oregon game. And then they have another top 25 win, which a lot of G5 teams do not, in that Wazoo win. And I kept waiting for them, 16, 17, 18. I kept waiting to see Boise. When they got to 15, it took a break. I was like, just the fact that they're inside the top 15 is kind of amazing to me. And to be at 12 is fascinating. And it does broach the possibility of, one, not just getting the bye, Chris, if BYU falters down the stretch. Boise, if they keep winning, they can sneak up there and get to 8. You're hosting a game on the blue turf. That would be quite a thing to see for the G5 team to host a game in year 1. I thought we might see it in the first 5 years, but to see it in year 1 would be kind of unbelievable.
Yeah, and to your point, I mean, we talked in our last episode, what are the teams that are going to be most disappointed by their rankings? I think we were wrong on all 3, and we ended up being. But my pick was Boise State.
Not wrong, just early.
Because for that reason, G5 teams are usually lower in the committee than they are in the poll. But this one, we all remember the UNLV win. We all stayed up and watched that game, and that's the win everybody remembers. But the win against Boise State was a blowout win, and that is the win that is way more important for the committee, coupled with, again, leading Oregon in that second half and almost winning that game. So, being down at 12, I like it because all season and ever since the 12 team got debuted, everybody thought, all right, 1 through 4 to the Power 4, the group of 5's the 12. That's just kind of the conventional wisdom that everybody's been saying. This is what's going to happen. So I really like the fact that Boise State could upend this in year one to kind of shake us from that notion. Because look, the group of five is not what it was. Most of the top group of five teams are in the Power Four now. And so the group of five really needed to make a strong showing in this first playoff, whether that's a competitive game or something else. And for Boise State to be here with a Heisman Trophy candidate, the potential
definitely matters.
Not finish at number 12, I think is really important to kind of set the tone for this stuff. So yeah, if BYU trips up somewhere or a Big 12 team has 2 losses and wins the championship game, it's a very easy path to see Boise State finish at number 4. But they keep winning, getting up to number 8 and potentially hosting
very real.
That's on the table.
Could you imagine them hosting a game? I feel like I said this on our show last night. But if they hosted a game against Indiana and we got the Blues versus the Reds, listen, I don't care who you're cheering for, who you want to win, but that would be cool. That's all I'm gonna say. That'd be cool.
Yeah, I want to see it. It'll be interesting to see. I don't know. I mean, if you're Boise, you probably want the bye more than you'd like the home game. But as a college football observer, in the first year of the 12-team playoff, I one of the things that I love about college football is the randomness, the absurdity, the personality, all those things. And the blue turf has become so iconic in the last 20 years that for them to host a playoff game in year one, I'm sure Boise, like I said, would prefer a bye if BYU loses a game between now and the Big 12 title game and then wins and Boise gets above them in the rankings to get that 4 seed in the bracket. But as a college football observer, I would like to see them do that. And I think, too, with the G5 aspect of this conversation, I like that it's not a default situation. Boise's just – not only are they good, but they are must-see TV because Ashton Jeanty – I mean, what would you say, Chris, in terms of the most electrifying players in college football this year? I'd say Milroe and Williams are probably top 5, both of them. But Jeanty – I mean, I guess Travis Hunter's probably in that mix. Genty's probably right there, as good as any of those guys. I might have Williams number 1, honestly. But like in terms of just like, you got to see this kid. Like the fact that the G5 team has that guy. I mean, I don't remember the last time we could even say that about a team outside of the Power 5.
It's important because the committee, again, you only put in your top 30 teams. There's usually not a lot, if any, group of 5 teams in that. And so I asked them, like, what is the protocol for that? Because if you don't have them in there and you have to pick one, they have a handful of committee members who are the point people for group of 5 teams. And then they basically present their recommendation to the rest of the committee because they may not be watching a lot of these games. But Boise State, having Ashton Jeanty, there's a reason to watch them every single week, and that's good.
Damien, if you're sitting there and you're on one of these teams that's either, I mean, just in the mix here, do you feel like from a player's perspective, it might change anything going from 4 to 12 and watching the rankings and paying attention to that? I mean, I don't really know what that would look like, but I'm curious to your thoughts.
I mean, yeah, just because of the competitive nature. And I mean, everybody's trying to make it to number 1. But, it's such a weird situation because for me, when talking about the playoffs, a lot of people have been talking about, well, do you want the first round bye or do you want home field advantage as like an 8 seed, right? Do you want to play a home game? And I'm thinking if you want to have the best chance to get to the playoffs, you want to be one of those top 4 seeds because you want that first round bye.
Yes.
People think like the biggest argument that I've gotten from a lot of people when it's talking about like, oh, well, if these top 4 teams are so great and they're so much better than, a 12 team or 11 seed or whoever, like, well, they shouldn't have a problem playing against those teams and beating them and showing the world that they're the better team. Well, yes, but that comes with a price because every game, the game of football, the injury rate is 100%. Every game, every quarter, you got guys going down left and right. So that's just another opportunity for your best player to get hurt, for your quarterback to get hurt, for your receiver to get hurt. And I know that shouldn't disqualify some of these matchups, but just in my thinking as a player, I want to do everything that I can to help my team get as close to that 4 seed, top 4 seeds as possible so we can get that first round bye. Just that way we can get an extra week of rest, we get an extra week of preparation. So like, yeah, all that stuff matters. The ranking matters, how you fall, how you rise. Like I guarantee you every player on the teams that are in this mix, they wish that they could be a top 4 team so they get that bye and get a week off.
And that's the debate from the beginning. People would say the 5 seed actually has the easiest path because you play a group of 5 team at 12 and then a Big 12 or ACC champ at number 4. But again, that number 12 seed may not be the group of 5. It may be a good team. You think Ohio State's like, yeah, we'll play Boise State, walk in the park right now? Like, no, of course not. This is why those buys matter. This is why those conference championship games are going to matter. And again, I'm very glad Boise State is doing it this first year so we can stop with that nonsense, the idea that the number 5 seed is the place that you want to be.
Chris, we got a bunch of other things to get to, but one thing I thought was interesting that I just literally figured out today. So the Pac-12, I don't know if you've heard this, Chris, they don't exist anymore. They don't have a championship game anymore outside of the Oregon State, Washington State just game. But so the Mountain West game moved to Saturday. They used to play on Friday. Were you aware, Chris, that the Mountain West and the AAC are playing at the same time?
Yes. I knew that because that was the only one who pays attention to these announcements. And when the announcements were made back in the offseason, I even tweeted at the time, it was a very real possibility the group of 5 berth will be decided with 2 ongoing games.
Yes, it's crazy. And I think like you could have a game like I'm curious how they set this up. Like if you're in the AAC and you win that game and Boise's on the ropes in the Mountain West and you're like on the podium accepting a championship trophy, is somebody like, are you just saying you need to hold off? We're going to finish watching this game on our phone. Like if Boise loses in the Mountain West, it's going to get real weird in a hurry. And that scenario is very interesting to me. I think, Army obviously in the driver's seat at this point, but like, don't sleep on Tulane. Tulane might sneak up.
Well, it depends who wins the American. And
then
exactly. If it's UNLV, Boise versus Tulane, Army, like if it's not Boise, if UNLV wins, it could be UNLV or it could be the winner of the American. We don't know. And there's a chance those teams may not be in the top 25 at that point.
Yeah. So it's going to be very, very interesting. I am excited to see that. I think, Chris, I don't want to be this guy. Can we talk about ESPN for a second? Can we talk about ESPN?
Yeah.
Okay. First off, I don't need Reese Davis in front of an electoral map. I just don't need that. We don't need any of that tonight. I wanted to try and watch college football, talk about college football. Didn't need an electoral map. Maybe that's just personal preference. 2, they got to figure out something with the reveal. It's the way it's done. I get
it's so confusing.
All this is very confusing. Like, Ohio State's number 2, but they're the 5 seed. Boise, like when they had Boise up there, they had them at the 12 seed. Like, so is Boise then? Are we sure they're 12? Like, so Boise's a 12, but they're also the 12 seed. It's very confusing. They're trying to do the bracket and the rankings at the same time, and I sort of get that. But like the bracket is kind of secondary. The committee isn't doing a bracket. The committee is doing the same thing they've always done. I think you got to just do the rankings, and then as soon as the rankings are done, you flip over to the bracket and say, okay, here's what the bracket looks like. As it's done right now, like, Chris, we spent a lot of time looking at this. I can kind of tell what's going on. There's parts of it that are confusing, but I think for a lot of people, I think it's a little disorienting. Am I being, am I yelling at the clouds or telling people to get off my lawn here?
So we asked the committee this at every meeting for the last couple of years. Like, how are you going to reveal it? Are you going to do the rankings then the bracket, or the bracket then the rankings? What order? And they didn't know for a while. So I didn't know until it showed up on my TV screen what exactly they were going to do. And it's tough because you may have noticed if you've been following college football this year, they're really, really trying to hit it over your head that the top 4 seeds are not the top 4 teams, because that's the system that we have because the Pac-12 went away and conference realignment did that. And so I understood doing it the way they did because the bracket's going to be the only thing people really care about, but the rankings are really the thing that matters. And so if you do them together, after a couple of weeks, we may be used to that, and that is fine. My problem was going bottom up, because bottom up, the drama's not at the top anymore, whether you're 1 or 2 or 3 or whatever, at least at this point, maybe for the end, maybe for the final rankings. But for this and for the ensuing weeks, the drama is going down. It's when you get to 6, 7, 8, who's hosting a game. Where's Boise State? Who's the last one in? Like that's the drama at the bottom of it. So I would have done it in the reverse order. I'm curious if they will change that next week, because I'm sure they got a lot of feedback, positive and negative about it. Didn't love it, but I also don't think there's an easy way to do it.
Yeah, and I think the top 4, we'll have a pretty good sense of it. I'm trying to think. I mean, there'll only really be one spot up for grabs, probably on Selection Sunday, the final week, right? That 4 spot we might have some debate over, but we'll probably know. And then
Well,
1, 2, 3,
1 and 2.
Well, does anybody care about 1, 2, and 3 in those?
Not at this point. I think at the end we will.
At the end, though, does it matter if you're 1, 2, or 3? I don't think it matters.
I mean, depending on the matchups, yeah.
Well, matchups, sure, but I'm talking about just being in the position. I mean, you'll learn the matchups later, but I don't think the position's specific. I mean, you might get some favorable matchups or not. But Damien, which parts of it did you find most confusing?
Just the way they unveiled it, the way that, like Chris said, when they went, I guess, bottom of the rankings to the top, the most important part is going to be the last couple teams in those last 6, 7, 8 matchups, who hosts who, that's really going to be the drama. I think that we have a clear-cut understanding of at least who the committee thinks are going to be the top 4. So that's not really where the drama is. That's not really where the tea is right now.
Mm-hmm.
I think just doing it from the bottom up was really confusing. Doing it where they explain the rankings and then, then the bracket, like, for me, I mean, obviously it's my first time kind of like covering this and watching and trying to figure it out.
Mm-hmm.
It would have been more easy if they had just done one or the other. Obviously, the bracket would have been more helpful. But I think when you combine two things, it makes it kind of, people just start to cross their wires, which I feel like I might have done a time or two. But yeah, they just need to find a more clear way to reveal all this, just so it's more clear, concise information for the viewers and the people who obviously have to talk about it.
Mm-hmm. Well, guys, we want to go and follow our own advice and go from the bottom to the top and sort of look at the rankings as a total picture here.
I mean, we're going top bottom, which was my advice. So yes, we can keep doing that.
My bad. Yes. Okay. So are we going to go from the bottom to the top? Chris, I'll let you make the call. Do we want to? What do we do? We've talked a lot about the top.
Top down. Do we need to talk any more about BYU? To me, that was the biggest. That's the team.
I mean, BYU, they just took away BYU's margin for error. I mean, I thought BYU might be closer to 5-6. And
I've got them at 6.
And that's a small margin of error, but I think you could lose a game probably, and still, if you're the Big 12 champion, get that bye. Now, I don't think there's any chance that they can lose as long as Boise wins out. If BYU loses before the Big 12 championship and wins it, they are not getting the bye. They are not getting that 4th spot. I don't think so, Chris.
We'll see.
No, they could. I would say 15% chance at most.
I mean, no, I guess no, because but if Iowa State wins out and beats BYU,
that would help them for sure. That would help them.
Does that Iowa State jump BYU? Or sorry,
maybe,
jump
but then, Chris,
what
if UNLV keeps winning and UNLV sneaks into the top 25?
Right. That's why that's
very
know.
possible.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So we got Oregon at number 1. I don't particularly care, but if you're trying to parse, between these teams, I mean, Oregon is undefeated. They got the Ohio State win. There's not a lot of debate there. They were unanimous in the media poll. They got 53 of 54 votes in the coaches poll. It's kind of whatever. Ohio State 2, Georgia 3, Miami 4, Texas 5. Any qualms there? I feel like it was fine.
No, I have Georgia ahead, but it doesn't matter.
Yeah, I think you can that 2 through 5. I think you can make a bunch of different cases.
It doesn't matter. It literally doesn't matter.
Yeah,
I don't have Georgia as my SEC champions. I don't have
Penn State at number 6. I got a problem with that. I had them behind Tennessee, behind BYU.
Mm-hmm.
I'm okay with having them ahead of Indiana. They do have some better wins than Indiana does, and they played Ohio State within 7 points. Again, close losses seem to matter to this committee, but 6 is to me way too high for Penn State.
Yeah, I would be with you on that. Tennessee at 7. I was very surprised to see Tennessee get the benefit of the doubt. I think, again, I'm going to look like what Charlie Day at the bulletin board here, just connecting all the dots, but. You look at, Mizzou in the top 25. That pushes Bama up. Tennessee has the Bama win. That pushes Tennessee up a little bit. They clearly respected the Alabama win because that's the only real win on Tennessee's schedule. It's really carrying a lot of weight for them. I did not think it would carry as much as it did, but a top 10 win. I guess what in the committee is a top 11 win is a top 11 win. So it was fine. Indiana, we've talked about there at 8. BYU at 9. We haven't somehow, Chris, we're 35 minutes in. We haven't talked about Notre Dame. A little lower than I thought, maybe, but I think people were. I was the only person. I feel like everybody's yelling at me after the Northern Illinois loss, but I was like, Notre Dame's still okay. Like the math is probably still on their side.
But you also think 2-loss Notre Dame is getting in, don't you?
Yeah.
Well, now I'm not so sure. Not so sure
Yeah.
now. We'll see if people keep losing, but either way, I mean, I didn't think Notre Dame's schedule would be what it was. I mean, at that week 2, that Florida State game was still a top 25 game. We thought USC would probably be a 9-10 win team. They're 4-5. So I think like Notre Dame's schedule.
Army is
Army all of a
sudden
is like a big game for them. Yeah. So their schedule kind of like disintegrating underneath their feet is not really their fault. But then they had the Navy game, which we'll see if Navy can sneak in. Well, probably not getting.
No, Navy just lost to Rice.
The Rice.
That Navy win doesn't help no more.
No, but the Army, we'll see what that means for Notre Dame. But 10-2 is going to be tough for Notre Dame at this point. But I don't think they're going to lose the rest of the way. Alabama at 11. I think we know why they're there. Eye test, Mizzou win, Georgia win. That Georgia win is doing some serious work for Alabama. But I will be interested to see again if Mizzou loses to Oklahoma, if that affects Alabama, because I think it might. Boise at 12 is interesting. We haven't really gotten into SMU. Chris, how should SMU feel right now?
They should feel disrespected. I had them at number 11. They just demolished a Pitt team that the committee put at 18. Their only loss is to BYU, who's number 9. They also went on the road and won at number 22, Louisville. Like I had SMU at 11 ahead of Alabama and ahead of Boise State. I had Alabama out of the field. So SMU is in a position now where they probably need to win out. Mm-hmm. One loss, even if it's in the conference championship game, because they finished with Cal, Virginia, Boston College. None of those wins are going to really boost them anymore. The chances of the ACC getting 2 basically hinge on if SMU upsets Miami in that championship game. Mm-hmm. I think SMU, I do think, is a bit disrespected here because they do have the wins. They have 2 top 25 wins and their only losses to an undefeated top 10 team. Like that's good. It took them early in the season to kind of get things going. The Nevada game wasn't great, but they got the quarterback situation figured out and they've been rolling and playing really well. So I'm surprised they're that low.
Yeah, and I think too, for whatever it's worth, Chris, they're still undefeated. Clemson's got 1 loss. I'd have to look at the tiebreakers again between 2 teams with 1 loss, but I think they can still get in with 1 loss. So in theory, they could drop a game, and then it comes down to if you upset Miami. I'll be interested to see how the committee treats them if they do win out and lose to Miami, and I think it will matter a lot how that loss looks. Ward Manuel wasn't specifically talking about that specifically, but I think SMU. Well, really, the Big 12 and the ACC, whether that's Iowa State, we'll see if Iowa State creeps up there. What happens to BYU? I mean, how those losses happen in the Big 12 and ACC championship will determine a lot about how those champions are treated. So maybe we'll see a situation where we get Jim Phillips or Brett Yormark. Is there an NBA jam button? Like whenever you're like up 30 points on a guy, and then all of a sudden you can't make a shot, and everything happens for the guy that's losing is getting. Basically, they're gonna pick up the red phone, but this is gonna be a close game. This is gonna be a close game either way. We'll see.
I tell you what, you should get Brett Yormark right now pounding the table for BYU. You should have Jim Phillips out there pounding the table for SMU. You have to push back now. Jim Phillips got a lot of crap from Florida State fans for being nowhere to be seen on selection Saturday, the championship game Saturday last year, while Greg Sankey was making the rounds, saying the possibility that Alabama and Georgia should both get into the 14 playoff picture, which is ridiculous. But he was out there making the case. And so the way the committee works, again, every conference has a couple of point people on the committee. Like there are a couple of committee members. Here are your conferences. All the teams in the conference, you direct your lobbying to this person, your stuff to this person, and these couple of people, and they take it to the rest of the committee. So those Big 12 and ACC people really need to really be doing that. Get out there. Say you're not happy with your position in the committee because ACC and Big 12 in a bad spot. BYU should be higher. SMU should be higher. And the commissioners, some of which don't like to ruffle feathers, are going to need to start doing that.
Yeah, that's an important, real quick, Damon. That's an important relationship because that's how you make sure the committee knows, hey, when we played X team, we didn't have our second round pick left tackle. Our quarterback left in the third quarter of that game. It's hard to see everything, and they might know that, but they might not, and you can make sure. Damien, what were you saying?
Well, no, I was just going to say, are we having the exact same conversation about SMU that we were having for Indiana? Because in my mind, if you put an Alabama A or a Georgia G on SMU's jerseys, I think they're ranked higher. I think with their resume, I think with their
Yeah.
2 top 25 wins and their 1 loss to BYU, I think they're ranked higher. I think their resume definitely compares better than some of the teams who made it in above them. So I feel like this is the same exact conversation of if this was a big time program, if this was an Alabama or an Oregon or somebody like that, they would have much more respect and they would be a top, like one of the top 12 teams.
I think you're probably right. And I think that my thought when I saw SMU, because that's kind of where I thought they would be, but then, you look at their resume and you're like, that doesn't really make sense. But I think, my instinct was, well, the ACC as a whole is down, so that's probably pulling their strength of schedule down in the metrics that we don't see. Again, there should probably be some more transparency there. I'd like to see some of those metrics. But then you look at, their only loss is by 3 points to BYU, who's undefeated. It's crazy. Like,
Right.
What's the difference between their resume, like their resume and you look at, like Tennessee, for example, like it's a little bit, I kind of see where people are coming from on that. Okay. We got Texas A&M at 14, LSU at 15. Texas A&M, a bit of a bag fumble in Columbia the other night.
A bit.
They were sitting there. That's a tough spot to be.
At least the committee put them ahead of LSU since they just beat LSU. The AP
but they're
the
not
AP
going
poll
to.
at LSU.
They're not going to if they win on Saturday night, which I think they might. But we'll see. I'll be there for that one. I'm really, man. You could feel the stakes of that Alabama LSU game. Like your season is over basically because both of those two teams, you have such high goals, and even a season like this for LSU where you're rebooting a lot, you got 2 new coordinators, you're kind of like figuring things out, but the championships are the standard at those places, and if you lose, you got a month left in the season where people aren't really going to care. Iowa State at 17, or excuse me, Ole Miss at 16. They can play their way back in. They'll have some opportunities. Obviously, Georgia, you need to win that one. Iowa State sitting there at 17. Chris, can Iowa State win their way into an at-large position?
I don't think so. They don't have many notable wins yet. They do still play Kansas State. I know I don't remember the rest of their schedule, but they won't play BYU until the championship game if they do. So I can't see it.
They've got at Kansas, Cincinnati, at the artist formerly known as Utah, and Kansas State at home in Farmageddon.
Yeah, unless it's possible that a lot of teams ahead of them lose. From this point downward, I don't think at large is in play for pretty much any of these teams.
They'll need a lot of help. And they might get it. I think we've talked so much all season about parity and unpredictability, and the power teams don't look good. It's easy to sit there and look and chart out paths and be like, well, Notre Dame lost to Northern Illinois. Just. And again, Vanderbilt beat Alabama. Like, things happen.
And we could get bid thieves. Like, that's the thing. Iowa State could not make the at large, but upset BYU and get in there, and maybe BYU stays in, or if SMU upsets Miami or something like that. It's like there is the potential. Again, there's 5 SEC teams tied in the loss column at the moment atop the conference. Who knows who's going to play in that championship game? Like,
maybe that's the new slogan of the ACC and the Big 12. We might have bid thieves.
Well, that is the importance of the conference championship and why so many teams are still alive in this, because of those conference championships.
Yeah, I think so. Pitt at 18. Chris, are you taking Pitt here? Pitt's there. They should be where they're at. I don't think they're that good, but you do what you do.
They do play Clemson. They do have a chance for a big win to kind of turn things around there. We'll see.
Although the problem is, if you beat Clemson, Chris, guess what? It's not a top 25 win anymore. You need to have them winning. This is what I think people forget about the committee that is really funny. I mean, it's funny to me. It might not be funny to them. But the only top 25 that matters is the committee's top 25. So you can win a game against a team that's in the top 25, but if you knock them out of the top 25, they need to keep winning to get back in and have that win count. You can say it's stupid, but that's the only way it has to be. It has to be that way. So
it helps. I will say, though, on the screens that you look at on the committee, it has your record against teams with a winning record, your record against top 25, and your record against top 50. So that right there, it is a number you can see pretty easily.
Yeah, I think that's changed how we talk about the sport, Chris, because it is, when I look at teams, I mean, the only thing that matters is what the committee thinks, and those are really strong predictors. Strength of schedule, your top 25 wins is very, very important. Teams against a winning record, top 50 comes into play, but that teams against a winning record stat was not a thing until the committee came along. And I think pretty interesting indicator of kind of, is that team, did you beat some teams that are competent? I don't, you're not going to get that much credit. Like Miami of Ohio, like people got mad because I referenced Notre Dame beating them. Well, Miami of Ohio had kind of a weird schedule early on. Notre Dame was 0-3 when they played them. Miami of Ohio might win the MAC. They're playing right now. They're tied with Ball State. They might win the MAC. We'll see. They got a lot of season left to play, but that's where that teams gets a winning record. Like you should get credit for beating a team that goes to the MAC championship, even if they're not great at the time.
Let me I'm going to correct myself. It's not top 50. It's conference record, wins against winning teams, top 25 record, and top 10 record. So forget what I said about the top 50. That's what falling out really matters. Yes.
19, Kansas State. I think they're in a very similar boat to Iowa State. It's going to be tough for them to get the at-large. They'll need a lot of help. They might get it, but we'll see. Colorado, they don't have the schedule at this point. You got to win the Big 12. You keep winning. You need one loss.
Which is very possible.
Yes.
Say it, Ubben. Which is very possible.
It is possible.
Very possible.
These teams are still in the mix to make the playoff. They are in the mix to make the playoff.
At the microphone today, Dion kind of downplayed the playoff talk. He said, we don't worry about that. Today, Dion stopped practice in the middle of practice, got the team together. They thought they were going to get ripped. And he said, this looks like a playoff team to me. So, Damien, we'll see. We'll see.
I got it written down.
Shout out to Dion. And then and he also learned a lot about the traditions of Texas Tech, where Dion surmised that they threw tacos in Lubbock. They throw tortillas. You will see them. It's very subtle if you don't know what you're looking for, because they're just like little tiny white discs coming out of the student section usually. Again, don't eat the tortillas. If you have to ask why, just trust me. Don't eat the tortillas. Colorado, number 20. Wazoo at 21. Chris, were you surprised to see Wazoo in the top 25? I got to say, I wasn't.
Floored. I have them in mind. They're there in the polls. They don't have many great wins. The only loss was to Boise, which was kind of a blowout. They did beat Washington. Like they're 7-1. Like that's a perfectly fine spot. The most notable thing about them here, though, they can only get to the playoff as an at-large. And that looks like that's too insurmountable.
Yeah.
At this point, they cannot get the group of 5 bid if they're ranked higher than Boise or any of that stuff. Only at large. They're probably not playing for a playoff spot, but they're 7-1. Like it's still a pretty good team.
Yeah. Once they lost to Boise, I kind of was like, you looked at their schedule, you look at the path, like I don't think there's any way they can get there, even if they're undefeated.
And they beat Texas Tech. They did beat Texas Tech, blew out Texas Tech. Although
Taj Brooks in that game, but either way. And then Louisville at 22, Clemson at 23, Missouri at 24, and Army at 25. Damien, when you look at some of these teams from, we'll say Iowa State down through Army, who do you think is like the most impressive team that when you watch them, you're like, that's a team I could see them making a run. Like that's a good team.
You guys are going to call me crazy. I'm sure the fans watching will too. I'm going to go with Colorado because they are much improved in a lot of areas. The one area of improvement they still need to focus on is protecting Shadur Moore. We all know that. They've somehow finagled a running game the past couple weeks. Their defense is playing a lot better with Warren Sapp at the helm. Like this is a much improved team. And what people aren't realizing is just how possible it is for them to get to the playoffs. All it takes is for Kansas State to knock off Iowa State. That's really all it takes, because then they're in. If BYU wins out, if Colorado wins out, it's going to be BYU and Colorado in the Big 10 champion, or in the Big 12 championship, excuse me. And I would take Colorado in that game, because to me, other than the offensive line, they're improved by a lot. They've improved a lot of different areas. So Colorado is my team. I think that they surprise people. I think that they win their way. Iowa State, they choke another one away because, in my opinion, they're really not that good. They're okay, but they're not that good. They open up a spot. And then once they get to the Big 12 championship, that's when I feel like people will realize, wait, no, that with all this time when Colorado's been building and getting better and better and better, we should have been paying attention, because in the meantime, a lot of people were just hating on Colorado and talking about like, oh, well, they're not this, they're not that. This isn't what we expected out of Prime. Well, no, they've been getting better and better and better quietly each and every week. And if they get the opportunity, if Iowa State lets them in, they're going to show it.
It'll be interesting to see how that plays out. Chris, any teams in that 18 to 25 range that you are buying some stock in the last month of the season?
I mean, Missouri's a weird team to have in there. I'm not buying them. I'm kind of the opposite here, but they beat Vanderbilt. You know, a lot of people have Vandy ranked. Like you kind of have to. You kind of have to have them there.
I love that you just said that sentence and you were right. Like it's a decent win.
It is because Vanderbilt beat Auburn, they beat Alabama, they beat Kentucky, 6 wins. Like it's a competent team. It's a good win. That's why Vandy's not in. I think in my rankings, I had Vandy in the top 25 in Army.
I kind of thought we might see Vandy sneak in there. I was looking at it. I was like, yeah, you know, because I was like, I don't think you're going to see Army or Wazoo. And then it's like, well, who goes in instead? I was like,
you wanted. I mean,
I thought maybe South Carolina, Tulane might sneak in, but
you want to talk about helmets? If Army, I think if Army wasn't the United States Army, I don't know if they'd be in the top 25.
Maybe not. You're saying there's a lot of Army respecters in the committee, I suspect.
Yeah, and look, they're a good team. They're a good team. They haven't trailed
really good
all year, but the North Texas game, this is going to be their first test. They haven't been tested at all. North Texas can score the ball. Keep an eye on that game.
Do you think, Chris, if Army had trailed at any point this season, that they would be in the top 25?
Possibly not. That is a very handy stat to throw.
It is. They're the last one standing. I don't remember a time getting this late in the season where we had 2 teams until last week that could say that, and that's
not only just 2 teams. Army and Indiana.
Yeah, Army and Indiana. Yeah. Ohio State and Alabama. Shout out to the Black Knights. Yeah.
That is a fun thing about this bracket in this season. You've got Indiana having one of the best seasons they've ever had. BYU having an unbelievably fun season.
Mm-hmm.
Boise State better than we expected. SMU having one of their best seasons in forever. Like there's teams up in this mix that are different. It's going to be a lot of fun. And kind of wrapping this up, I think the rankings week to week are going to be much more interesting than they've ever been. Because previously we only really cared about the top 4. And
how the 15 to 25, the only thing that were relevant is like, what did you do to the teams that are in that top 8's resume?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So each week we could have some changes that are going to be a lot more interesting to talk about than at the top.
And some upsets, possibly. Mm-hmm. Thank you guys for listening. It's been our recap show. It was interesting. This was not the most like compelling rankings. I think it was like there wasn't a ton of like surprises. I don't think anybody should be standing on tables like screaming at the committee. I remember there've been a few times like the Cincinnati year. I think I wrote a very angry column when they were like number 6 in the first rankings. They ended up getting in, but it looked a little iffy for them. Anyway, thank you guys for listening. Please, if you're not already subscribed to the show, you should do that on Apple, Spotify, Overcast, wherever you listen to your podcast. We are there. We publish 3 podcasts a week on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays throughout the college football season. Check out our YouTube channel at youtube.com/Until Saturday, where we're going to be streaming our college football playoff bracket challenge. We did that on Tuesday night, and you can check up on that, enter your bracket in, do all that stuff, and compete with me, Damien, and Ralph Russo. You got until I think Friday is the deadline to put your brackets in. You got to see the rankings. You got a leg up on us. We'll see if you can beat us. I doubt it, but we'll see. We'd love for you guys to play along with us though, and you can do that. The link to that is in the show's description. And call the Until Saturday phone line. I'm curious what you think. You could have some rankings thoughts. I think the rankings always gets people talking. And if you got thoughts on the games on Saturday, give us a call at 316-462-9852. And check out the Until Saturday newsletter as well. Jana Bardall does a great job with that. And it is free. You can get a little taste of what we do at The Athletic. And you can find the links to the newsletter, our YouTube channel, everything else in the show's description. For Damien Harris, Chris Vannini, I am David Ubben. We will talk to you again on Thursday, our Week 11 preview. We got a lot to talk about, some big games, Georgia, Ole Miss, Alabama, SU. We'll get to that. And remember, don't forget the turnover chain, even if you're ranking your top 25 and you're on the committee. Thanks for tuning in, guys. We'll see you soon.
We might still be live.
Producer Cam, where is he at?
All right.
In case